Okay, so I know I started on this slide last time, but we'd started on class Trematoda, the Flukes. And they've got complex life cycles. They parasitize a wide range of hosts, you being one of them. You've got a lot of fluke parasites. And they typically spend part of their life in one host, for example, you, and a part of their life in another host, which is very often a snail. All right? So the alternate host of many trematodes are snails. Does that seem kind of weird?
Yeah.
What? That it's snails or that they alternate between hosts? Maybe both. Yeah?
Flukes are just weird in general.
They are. They're dead cool. I love these parasites. I love the complex and the complexity of their life cycles. And you've got to ask yourself, how on earth did all of that evolve? They've been around for a very long time, but how did it evolve and why? I mean, there are reasons, but they're the sort of questions that you should be asking. So they produce these surface proteins. As parasites, I guess a good parasite feeds off of its host, but doesn't really want to damage or kill the host. I mean, some parasites need to kill the host in order to disseminate. But if you don't need the death of the host to disseminate, you know what dissemination means, don't you? To spread, right? So it's not, I guess, good in the parasite's best interest very often to make the host really sick and to kill the host. If you can keep the host alive, you're still going to obviously feed off of the host, then that increases the number of offspring you can produce while you're inside that host. All right? So these parasites have been around a long time, and they do make you sick. A lot of them are bad for you. But think about it, it's in their best interest to keep you alive and healthy for a good amount of time so they can basically parasitize, live off of you for as long as possible. So one way that they're able to thwart your immune system and some of your normal body defenses against parasite is that they produce surface proteins that mimic your body surface proteins of your cells. That way your immune system, which is constantly looking for non-self proteins, says, oh, yourself, touches the parasite's contact's made, and it said, all right, you're not different, you're no different to self, so it leaves it alone. That's one way they're able to thwart your immune system. Okay, so I want to look at, with some of these parasites, I'll go over some case studies, some specific examples of some of the, I guess, more important parasites, or at least the ones that are more common and prevalent. All right, so how do you say this word? Schistosoma mansoni. Schistosoma mansoni. All right, that's its scientific name, and its common name is bilharzia. About 200 million people are infected worldwide with bilharzia. And it's second only to malaria, right, as the most devastating parasitic disease on a global scale. How many people die each year of malaria, do you think? So 1 and 2 million people die each year of malaria. That's a huge number of people dying from that kind of disease. Now, what's interesting, it's mostly in third world countries, and of course, if it was in a developed country, US or Europe, we'd have nailed down, we'd have gotten rid of it, or at least reduced its impact. It's kind of a shame that if it's a developing country, it tends to be not ignored, but you know, it doesn't get the attention that maybe it should. This one's not that difficult to cure. You can cure it with a drug called praziquantel, which is readily available, and it's not that expensive. Yet, many people are infected. It's got a fascinating life cycle. I'm only going to briefly go over it. If we were taking a 300 or 400 level parasitology course, then we would delve into a lot of detail. But it's a fascinating parasite. So let's see how it works then. So you release, let's just say you release eggs into the water. You release an infective stage into the water in your feces. All right? Now, you say to yourself, well, I don't go around pooping in water all the time, but a very large part of the world's population does. Defecate outside, doesn't have the normal sort of sewage systems that you have. So they defecate outside, maybe directly into the water or close to it. The eggs find their way into water, and the eggs hatch into a ciliated larva. That ciliated larva swims around a little bit, and it's looking for a host, its alternate host, which is a snail. And there are a lot of different snail species that can act as a host. Once inside the snail, again, it goes through a lot of its complex parts of its life cycle, but it's essentially to increase numbers, to amplify in numbers inside the snail. Now, this ciliated, motile larva emerges from the snail. It swims around in the water, and it's looking for a human host. And it's very good at detecting human skin. Hits your skin, recognizes you as a human, because it doesn't have eyes, and then it looks for a place where it can burrow through the skin, and that's typically in a hair follicle. So it will burrow into your skin through a hair follicle, enter your bloodstream, and this is where it gets really sort of cool and complicated. It makes its way around your body. All right? It goes to a number of different places in your body, but ultimately ends up in blood vessels associated with your colon. Now, while it's in your body, your blood, your circulatory system, males and females get together. So that's what this diagram is up here. All right, see the male, in this case it's much bigger, which is not usually the case. Oftentimes the females are bigger. In fact, for most flukes, sorry, they're hermaphroditic. These are unique, well, not unique, but kind of different. They've got opposite sex. So typically the female's bigger than the male with these parasites because eggs are bigger than sperm. But in this case, separate sexes, a little different to most flukes, and the male is the larger one. There's the female. She kind of lives in a groove in its body, which is kind of a fold in the body of the fluke. And they get together, and then they just hang out in a blood vessel by your colon. Male makes sperm, female makes eggs. They get fertilized, and then they essentially burrow their way through the blood vessel, burrow their way through the colon wall, and make it into your colon, and then the eggs are released in the feces. What a fascinating life cycle that is, isn't it? Yep. Must be incredibly successful because there's more than 200 million people worldwide that have it. Okay. So there's the mature flukes. Quite big, that size. Yep. See them with the naked eye very easily. All right. Anybody got any idea where this picture's taken? It's beautiful, isn't it? These are the sort of places you should be going to in your summers. All right, so this is Malawi, and this is on the shores of Lake Malawi. Now, I stayed there. This was probably about, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, and it was very, very cheap. Right, we wanted a place to stay, and we asked this guy, you know, what's the cost of the room? And they said it was, I think they said it was like 25 Malawi kwacha, but that was negotiable with the owner. Now, 25 Malawi kwacha at the time was about 50 US cents. I went, what do you negotiate for? I'm going to get them down to 15 cents, right? All right, so it's incredibly cheap, gorgeous place. Yep. So this was a guy who just happened to be in his dugout, and I talked to him, and I wanted to go to this place because it's got the world's highest density of fish eagles. Well, maybe not the world's, but a very high density of fish eagles. And I wanted to photograph the fish eagles. So what he did is he made his own little spear gun, which is made from the tube of a snorkel and the rubber from a bike inner tube and a long piece of metal. Puts the long piece of metal in the tube, pulls the rubber back, dives down underwater, spears the fish, and you can see he got one. So then he went further out in his dugout. I had my camera. And what he would do is he would have the fish and he would whistle. And he'd throw the fish. And of course the eagles are looking for a free meal. And they would fly down and grab the fish and I'd photograph them. And it was just an awesome day spent photographing these birds. But it was back in the time when digital SLR cameras were very, very expensive. So you had film cameras. And so, you know, with even a fast film with 36 exposures, and you're going, gone. That roll of film's gone in no time at all. So I got a lot of pictures, but a lot of them didn't come out. But it was a pretty awesome day. All right. So why am I telling you about Lake Malawi and fish eagles and how to spear them and where you should be going for your summers? Yeah, there's an awful lot of bilharzia in and around Lake Malawi. All right. So I was swimming in the lake and I got out and I thought, oh, should I really have been doing that? So I went and bought some Praesequantum and took it anyway. So And this is a market on the shore of Lake Malawi. What are those little piles? Anybody know? Termites. They actually taste quite good. They're kind of greasy and crunchy. They don't really taste of anything. What's that look? All right. So here's a map of regions of the world then that have bilharzia. Now, this just obviously shows countries or specific districts or regions that have it. I don't want you to be mistaken and say, oh, if I just hop this side of the border, I'm free. All right, that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, but look at it. Huge parts of Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. All right, so that's bilharzia. The next case study, and we saw this organism in lab, is Fasciola hepatica. That's a scientific name I definitely want you to remember. I'm going to ask you to write it out and repeat it in an exam. Okay? What's the quickest way to remember a word like that? You think a good, quick way to remember it? There's correct spelling and how to write it. What about if you read it 10 times? Is that a good way? It's okay. What's a better way? Write it down. I wouldn't even type it. I'd handwrite it. Write it once, write it twice, write it a third time from memory. If you can't do it, go back and check. But keep going until you can write it down from memory without having to cheat. Then do it 3 or 4 days later. If you can do it 3 or 4 days later, you've probably got it. So Fasciola hepatica then is the sheep liver fluke, and it can infect you too. Do you remember seeing it in lab? Yep. So this is what a whole one looks like. We had the whole preserved ones. Yep. You had ones under a microscope slide that was stained, and they were awesome. The level of detail you could see in them was amazing. Many of you saw the eggs, didn't you? Yeah, that was pretty cool. All right. And you can identify a lot of these structures. But an enormous part of their body mass is devoted to one thing. What's that? An enormous part of their body mass is devoted to one thing. Eggs. Making eggs. Making gametes and eggs. Now, they've got ovaries and testes, which means they're hermaphrodites. They're making sperm and eggs. I think they can self-fertilize, but they prefer to cross-fertilize with another individual. All right? So, an enormous part of their body mass is testes, but this region around here is called a Whittling gland, and it's all about putting a shell around the eggs. That egg has got to stay resistant to adversity, different kinds of adversity, for as long as possible to maximize the chance you're going to get passed on to its other host. And its alternate host is a what? This you would see in a sheep, in its liver. What's its alternate host? Snails. What are the alternate hosts of virtually all flukes? Snails. Good. All right. So this is what a sheep's liver looks like that has a reasonably high infection of liver flukes. Now again, they've got quite a complicated sort of life cycle once they're inside the host, and I'll briefly touch on it. But before they're adults, before they mature into adults, they're quite small, and they essentially munch their way through the liver. Liver is nice, soft tissue. They don't have big teeth. When you looked at them under the scope, you saw they've just got a small little mouth with a sucker on, didn't you? And they kind of just like suck through the tissue. If you've seen and felt fresh, uncooked liver, you'll see it's very soft. Yeah, it's not like muscle tissue, which is quite tough. So they just munch their way through, and then they grow. They grow in size, and then they kind of migrate to the bile ducts, or the smaller ducts leading into the main bile ducts, the biliary ducts in your liver. And they hang out there. And they shed enormous numbers of eggs into the biliary ducts that make their way into the bile ducts, which opens up to where? Where does the bile duct open up to? Oops, I've jumped the gun a little bit. I'll finish the story. It opens up into the, which part of your digestive system is the part just downstream of the stomach? No, close. It's called the duodenum. That's the right way to pronounce it. I know you want to say duodenum, but it's duodenum. For sure. All right. So it opens up into the duodenum. All right. And they release tons of eggs. And, of course, the eggs make their way through the rest of your digestive system, the rest of your gut. And then they're released in your feces, shed out into the environment. And they want to hatch, and they want to find a what? A snail as the intermediate host, right? Okay, so if you were to take some liver tissue that had a fluke in it, and then take a section of the liver tissue that had the fluke in it, that's what the cross-section would look like. Here's the liver tissue, and there's a cross-section through the fluke. Okay. They've got a mouth. The mouth opens up into a gut. Do they have an anus? No, they don't. As you should have seen in the specimen, the gut is blind ending. Yep, blind ending. Lots of diverticula of the gut. The food goes in and the feces come out the same way. All right, so it's got an intermediate host, which is a snail. Now, once it gets into the snail, goes through several stages in the snail, and then another stage emerges from the snail. And that stage swims around in the water, and it makes its way to any kind of plant life, any plants that are aquatic and growing maybe on the banks of the river or the pond or the stream. Like watercress, for example. That's where these little larvae will go. And they will attach themselves to the leaf and insist on the leaf surface. Now, why is that a good thing? Why would they want to do that? Well, that's the stage that's emerged from the snail, right? It's emerged from the snail, so now it's got to make its way back into a what? A sheep, for example, or you, or some other mammalian host. So, emerges from the sheep, swims, insists on the leaf of, say, watercress or some other aquatic plant. Well, that's what sheep might eat. All right? Or you might eat. People go collect wild watercress, for example. So, and if you don't cook it, you ingest it. Once it goes into the digestive system, the pH digestive enzymes basically tell that cyst, wake up. You're in the place where you want to be. And it burrows through your intestinal wall, makes its way into the bloodstream, migrates around. Well, actually, no, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. It burrows through the wall and ends up in your peritoneal cavity, And it just kind of like wiggles around a little bit in your peritoneal cavity, munching off some of the organs there, but finally finds your liver, munches all through your liver, grows and grows and grows, then makes its way to the bile ducts, and then it produces its eggs. That's a complicated life cycle, isn't it? How does that make you feel? That they're crawling around your peritoneal cavity, just munching on things.
Gross.
Yeah? Is it gross?
Yes.
All right. But they can make enormous numbers of eggs each day. So, a single one can release 25,000 eggs a day. Isn't that crazy? A single sheep that's heavily infected can release 500,000 eggs per day. And you saw them, they're small. Why so many eggs? Why do these parasites make enormous numbers of eggs?
Because it's hard for them to get fertilized, and the chance of survival is probably pretty
So the eggs have already been fertilized, but you're on the right tracks. What was the last thing you said?
survival rate. Yeah, it's more difficult for them to survive and get through the cycle that they need to get through.
So why so many then? What's improbable?
That all of them will find the snail.
Yeah, that all of them will find a snail. That's improbable. So if you make enormous numbers of eggs, then you're maximizing your chance of finding your alternate host, the snail. All right? That's what it's all about. Okay, so just to refresh your memory, or if you didn't know it anyway, there's your liver, nice and soft. There's your bile duct, and it branches many times up into your liver, falling in these biliary ducts, and that's where the adults live, sort of in your liver in the bile and biliary ducts, and they shed their eggs into that common bile duct, which ultimately releases bile and other substances produced by the liver into the duodenum. Okay? And it makes its way down the rest of your digestive tract. Okay. Any questions about the class Trematoda, the flukes? No? Yeah.
So I have
Turbularia, class Turbularia, yep.
What's the lifespan difference between the two?
Oh, so the Turbularians, they're free living, right? How long do they live? I mean, oof, I really don't know the answer to that question, but we're talking about probably months, not years, all right, for the little flatworms. But they're kind of weird because sometimes they can break into two and you've got two individuals. I guess then they start their new life. But I think you're looking at sort of months, not years. And for these other flatworms, also months, not years. I don't think they're super long-lived inside the host. They might go for a year or two. I'm not 100% sure. It's a good question. Inside the snails, we're looking at the order of sort of months for them to go through their life cycle inside snails. Okay. All right. Any questions then before we move on to the class Cestoda, the tapeworms? Nope. All right. So, going to move on to our third class of the platyhelminths, class Cestoda, the tapeworms. So, tapeworms are also parasites. They're internal parasites of many vertebrates. Here's what separates them from the trematodes. I mean, a lot does, but the most obvious features are they don't have a digestive system. They have no mouth and no digestive system. They also have a Scolex. So without a digestive system, that tells you quite a lot about where they probably live. They live in a place where they can simply absorb all the nutrients that they need. So inside your gut, inside the lumen of your gut, is a perfect place to live. You're finding the food, you're breaking it down, they're simply absorbing from you. What a great parasite, eh? So the Scolex end. I don't want you to think about the Scolex as a head, although it's sometimes referred to as the head end. It's not really a head, it's the Scolex, all right? Does it have a mouth? Is it chomping? No, there is no mouth. Okay? The Scolex is the end which anchors the tapeworm to the host, usually to the intestinal wall, via hooks and suckers. Anchors itself. What's the name of the muscle contraction in your intestines that moves the food along? Peristalsis. If it didn't anchor itself to the wall, it would just be moved along by peristalsis and leave your body, wouldn't it? Yep. So, the Scolex then, just behind the Scolex, you'll start to see small proglottids. And the proglottids are the small segments of the tapeworm ribbon. You'll start to see the development of small immature proglottids. And they form just behind the Scolex. They add new proglottids. So, of course, as the tapeworm gets longer, at the opposite end to the Scolex, they are the oldest proglottids. In the middle, you've got the intermediate ones, and just behind the Scolex, you've got the youngest proglottids. Now, I don't want you to mistake the ribbon being broken up into proglottids as segmentation. So these worms are not segmented worms, even though the tape of a tapeworm looks like it's in segments. We'll look at true segmentation and what it is to be or to have a segmented body form later when we talk about the annelids. All right? So is everybody okay with the proglottids then? We saw them in lab, yep. And you saw that the tapeworm is one big ribbon made of these proglottids. Now, every proglottid is almost a carbon copy of every other one, right? But bear in mind the ones behind the Scolex are immature, and the ones at the very end are gravid, probably full of eggs. But they're basically the same. They're these little repeating units. So, reproduction in tapeworms is typically sexual reproduction, sperm, fertilize eggs. They are able to self-fertilize. But ideally, you've got two tapeworms, and they can cross-fertilize. Okay? Once proglottids are adjacent to each other, sperm can leave, make their way into little gonopore, go down a sperm duct, and then fertilize the eggs in the proglottid. So once the eggs are fertilized, they mature, a little shell is laid around them, and sometimes the eggs are released from the proglottids. Sometimes the proglottids break off. But either way, proglottids or eggs are shed and released from the body in the feces. You poop out proglottids and eggs. Okay? Now, the eggs and the proglottids are typically very robust and very long-lived in the soil. I believe many of them can live for decades in the soil. Why so long-lived?
Time to attach to another host. It needs time to survive to attach to another host.
Right, it needs time to find its way to another host. So that maximizes the chance that you'll be found by another host. Imagine if they only lived a week. That's going to decrease the exposure to their alternate host. All right, so here are some awesome scanning electron micrographs, most of them colorized, of the Scolex of different tapeworms. And as you can see, you've got suckers and you've got hooks. And behind there, you can just start to see these very small immature proglottids develop. Small. See the scale bar? That scale bar is 100 micrometers. Look at that one. That's just awesome, isn't it? Imagine that anchored to your intestinal wall. But it's very tiny. Yeah. Now that's something out of a sci-fi show, isn't it? That just doesn't look real. So they're suckers. Don't look at those as mouths, even though they kind of look like it, but they're suckers. Yep. And that's going to hold on. And that's what the full tapeworm ribbon looks like. So on this image, you've got left and you've got the right side. Which side, left or right, has the oldest proglottids? Right. Where's the Scolex? Left side. Good. All right. And these can get very, very long. Meters and meters and meters long. Fish, believe it or not, have some of the longest tapeworms. And this is a tapeworm being passed by a goat. So I don't know how. Maybe the tapeworm died, or maybe it lost its anchor. Maybe it was treated with a medication which caused the tapeworm to somehow break. But anyway, it's being passed. And they're quite strong. Dogs can get tapeworms. And when the dog poops on your lawn and it's got tapeworms, and your little 2-year-old brother and sister go out there and play, oh my goodness, they're not good about washing their hands. And these eggs and these proglottids can stay viable for an awful long time in the soil and on the grass. Just think about that. Next time you might want to get a very specific area for your dog to go potty in, right? Not just everywhere. So then you can look in the feces and you can see proglottids with your eye. Eggs, more difficult. Usually you've got to put them under a microscope. Right? You've got to put fecal samples under a microscope and you can recognize the eggs. Sometimes what you can do is shake the feces up with water, and you can use, there is a couple of different techniques. One is centrifugation, and you can spin out the eggs and you can look at a high concentration of the eggs that way. All right, so the tapeworm proglottid we looked at in lab was a dog tapeworm. All right, Dipylidium is the genus, Dipylidium canium. This is a mature proglottid from a different species of tapeworm. All right, this is in the genus Taenia. It's also a dog tapeworm, but it looks a bit different to the Monesia, the Dipylidium one that we looked at. But they've still got the same basic parts. There's a genital pore, a gonopore, which is where the gametes can pass. Sperm duct, that's where the sperm are going to go. It's basically one big egg-making factory, or gamete-making factory. It's going to make lots of sperm from the testes, lots of eggs from the ovaries, and as the eggs get fertilized, it's got to shell the eggs. And again, here's some drawings of what the Scolex and a proglottid would look like. Good? Okay. So let's have a look at the life cycle then, because they do have fascinating life cycles. And this is the, which one is this? So this shows you the life cycle of 2 of the more common tapeworms in cattle and pigs, Taenia solanum and Taenia saginata, right? The pig tapeworm and the cow tapeworm. They're essentially the same, but of course one has the pig as an alternate host, the other one has a cow as an alternate host. So let's just go through that life cycle. So here's where it starts. You are carnivores and you like to eat meat. You like to eat pork, you like to eat beef. But let's just say it's not cooked properly and they're infected with this stage of the tapeworm. All right? It's called a Cysticercosis is the stage, and it's in something called an oncosphere. So that's present in the muscle tissue of infected cattle and pigs. Cooking it kills them. It's not cooked properly, they don't die. You ingest it, of course you digest the meat, and the minute that happens, your digestive system essentially wakes it up. All right? And inside it almost looks like a mini Scolex and a slight part of a ribbon of the tapeworm. And then, of course, once it's in your small intestine, the Scolex attaches itself, it starts to feed, and it starts to add more proglottids. The eggs are fertilized, and the proglottids are shed. All right? All the eggs, they're shed out to the environment, and of course a cow or a pig has to eat the proglottids or the eggs. All right. Now, do cows and pigs eat human feces? Yeah, they definitely do. Anybody been to a developing country? Pigs love human feces. In fact, very often, and I'll tell you a story, this is going back probably a decade and a half or 2 decades, had some friends, went to India, they stayed there for, I don't know, a couple of weeks, they wanted a rural experience, stayed in a rural village, and very little goes to waste. So they asked where the restroom was, and they kind of pointed to a shed, and in the shed there was a plank, and in the plank there was a little hole, and that's where you went to the restroom. So they went to pooped in the restroom, right? Restroom. And what they heard literally a few seconds later was so the pigs run up and they eat human feces. All right? So cows are less apt to do that, but of course you've got eggs and you've got proglottids out in the grass, and as cows consume the grass, they consume everything that's on them. So that stage of the life cycle, which is a different stage than the one that infects you, is in the gut of the cow or pig. Again, it's woken up, burrows through the gut wall, migrates in the blood system to muscle tissue where it encysts, and it stays there and hopes that it will find the human alternate host. Alternate between humans and cows or pigs. So this is what a section of pork muscle looks like with those Cysticercosis inside. It can be quite high densities of them. Now just remember, this stage is what infects you. The stage that is released in your feces infects cows and pigs. And when it's in the cow and pig, it sort of wants to go and find the muscle where it develops into this. Is everybody okay with that? It's quite specific. So here's a cross-section of a Cysticercosis, and you can very clearly see the hooks and the suckers of this sort of embryonated egg. Yep. You can see that. That's what you would eat. So, how do you know if you've got a pork tapeworm? So usually there's no symptoms, but it does depend on the species. The tapeworm will develop in your gut if the embryonated egg is ingested in muscle tissue. But what happens if you accidentally ingest an egg or a proglottid from a human source? Where is that egg or proglottid expecting to go? Into a cow or pig, and then into the muscle of the cow or the pig, right? But what happens if it goes from you, not into a cow or pig, but from you back to you? Now, I know you might think that's very unlikely to ingest a proglottid, but they're kind of small. But an egg, that's very feasible, especially with children. All right? Doesn't take much. You saw how small the eggs were. Doesn't take much to get them back into your mouth. So what happens if that happens? So think about this. You've then ingested that egg. It's going to go down into your stomach, and it thinks it's where? in a cow or pig. So then it's going to do what? Try and migrate itself to a muscle. Trouble is, it's doing that, and all the while it's thinking, all right, but this doesn't seem quite right. Yep. It's not in the correct host. So if that happens, you can get quite a serious disease called Cysticercosis can develop. Now, if they find themselves in a muscle, usually there's no symptoms. Usually it's not a big deal. We don't even know it, unless there's a lot of them. But, again, they don't really know where they are. They can lodge themselves in your brain. And when they do that, they develop, and then it can be quite serious. Then you get things like seizures and headaches, confusion. It can kill you. So I'm not going to click on the link, but you can click on the link to see the full life cycle. It's basically human to human. Yep.
So can these tapeworms infect like wild animals, like deer?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very wide range of hosts.
It doesn't have to be a cow or a pig.
They can be host specific. The species can be host specific. How non-specific they are, I really don't know the answer to that question. Like Fasciola hepatica, it's got a range of hosts. But Tinea saginatum, I don't know if it's only in cows. I don't know if that has other hosts that it's sort of happy with. I don't know. I would imagine it is, but I don't know. It's got to be. It's got to be wider than just cows or pigs. Yeah.
Would the animal show symptoms at all?
So usually not. It's in the muscles. And I don't know how often it would go to the brain. If it goes to the brain, you might see symptoms. But in the muscles, tend not to. All right, now you ready for this? This is going to be a little bit graphic. Here's what happens when this is cysticercosis, where it lodges itself in other parts of your body. So your brain, for example. See all those little black spots with a dot inside? That's where they develop in your brain tissue. Yep, obviously that's going to have some serious ramifications, right?
Would that be treatable?
No, I don't believe it is. Not in the brain. I don't believe so. This is where it lodged and started to develop in the neck. And this cyst was removed, and that's what it looked like. Isn't that crazy? So cysticercosis, if it happens to you, let's hope it's just in the muscle. But it can be other parts, and then things like this happen. It's amazing, isn't it?
How did it get so big? It not just stays a little...
So I don't know how it got so big or why it would. All I can think is that the parasite doesn't really sort of know where it is, so it might develop in a way that it shouldn't, and your body responds in other ways. All right, so this is partly the parasite growing and partly a response by your body to sort of wall it off or insist it or keep it in one place.
But normally it just stays real small.
It can, yeah, in the muscle tissue. You saw how big they were. They're not that big. All right. So here's the life cycle of the dog and cat tapeworm. It's got another interesting life cycle. It's Dipylidium canium. It's the one that you saw on the microscope slide that had the proglottid that you drew and the Scolex. So let's have a brief look at this one. So let's see. Where's number one? Where's the number one? Oh, that's it. It's the yellow one. Right. So the proglottids are going to emerge either from a human or from dog or cat in the feces. That's going to contain these embryonated eggs, okay? And they, let's see, these are going to be ingested by larval fleas, okay? Once in the flea, they go through a couple of stages of their life cycle, and they're in the flea then, the adult flea. The adult flea, which carries this different stage of the life cycle, is then ingested by a dog or a cat, which happens often when they're grooming the fur. Can also be ingested by you. Now, I don't know, do you lick your dogs and cats and ingest fleas that way? I don't know. You swallow all sorts of stuff, I'm sure, at night. But anyway, they'll hop into your mouth, maybe the fleas, you'll swallow them. And of course, once you've got the flea inside you, then the stage inside the flea is going to hatch, develop into a tapeworm, which is going to produce proglottid, and the life cycle continues. So fleas are the alternate hosts. Good? Another good reason to keep your dogs free of fleas, right?
So you won't know that you have a tapeworm until like becomes serious, like it goes to like brain or something.
Right, well, I think there are other symptoms if you've got them in the gut. There can be some bleeding, can be blood in the stool. I think you can see, you know, sometimes the tapeworm sort of dangles out, all right? Sometimes you can see proglottids in your feces. Some people say you feel sort of a weakness because it's, you know, you're not getting the nutrition you need. But honestly, in a first world country like this, we eat many more calories than we need. I don't think you're going to be, you know, tired from a tapeworm absorbing too many calories. Okay. Good.